Hi, John. Welcome to the Book Dragon. We're here today to talk about your book, Me and My Shadow, which is a memoir about cancer.
Hi, Michelle. Nice to be here.
So, I've got a few questions to ask you today for your interview. And I'm going to start by asking you, what made you decide to write your story?
Yeah, it's a good question to start with. I've been thinking about it for a very long time because the written word can, as we know, in the right context, be such a powerful medium. But quite simply, there were three reasons that I wrote Me and My Shadow, Memoirs of a Cancer Survivor. First and foremost, I wanted my message and the story to be one of hope and inspiration to everyone in society, but particularly to anyone touched by a cancer diagnosis, which, as we know statistically, is 1 in 2 of the population. And that's a truly scary thought. And importantly, there still remains so much negativity around a cancer diagnosis. And sadly, again, we know that not everyone survives a cancer diagnosis. However, I very much wanted to put something out there that people could identify with, but also, as I said, take inspiration from the book. Secondly, I wanted healthcare professionals to understand the psychological burden of a cancer diagnosis. That's an absolutely immense burden to carry when you've been told that you've got cancer. And historically, the healthcare model was focused on the physical needs of individuals. Although, speaking as a retired healthcare professional now, I'm pleased to say that things are starting to change as we accept that the psychology of long term illness is an important component of care. And survivorship issues are now a fundamental part of cancer care management. Sadly, having seen things with my own eyes at a variety of different hospital establishments as a senior clinical nurse, some nurses still do not understand or even accept the burden of psychological overload caused by a cancer diagnosis. And to put that into context, it's important for me to say I'm not trying to be controversial. I just want to be honest in my reflections of what I've seen as a healthcare professional at different hospitals. Although the vast majority of nurse specialists are empathetic and understanding, I'm talking of only a small handful of nurses who, sadly, in my view, shouldn't be in cancer services. Thirdly, the book was meant to be a catharsis and finally rid some, if not all, of the demons that lurked in the deep recesses of my mind. During chemotherapy, a hidden veil of unanswered questions pestered my subconscious mind every hour of every day. Self posed questions of mortality and survival that raised emotions that were so diverse and unknown to my immature mind that they caused fear and banished my optimism. A darkness that lurked in the canyons of my mind, always trying to befriend me, a darkness that offered its cruel hand towards ending my own life. And yet, thankfully, I have no shame in saying I didn't have the courage or the heart to step forward and grip that handshake, a handshake that would have terminated my life. Regularly, a cloud of blackness would obscure my mind when I least expected it, and I found it difficult to control those demons. Back in the 70s, there were no support groups, no specialist nurses, and almost no one willing to speak with you about your cancer diagnosis. It felt like I was a one man battle, and I didn't believe that I was winning this most important war. And thoughts of suicide, which at least would have ended my psychological pain, were frequent visitors into my mind. And I think from my perspective, you have to understand that emotions don't follow a prearranged script when you're attacked by the turmoil of malignant disease. The confusion that's inflicted on the mind and the desire to rid your body of an unwanted accomplice is one of the hardest issues to deal with. Feelings of helplessness and despair are at times almost constant companions. So, although the picture I've just presented may sound dark and depressing, I wanted to demonstrate in the book the psychological impact of a cancer diagnosis on individuals, irrespective of age, gender, colour, or social standing. But above all, I wanted to offer a story that explained about the drive of the human survival instinct, a chronicle of hope, and of all the reviews so far and the feedback I've received, clearly does emphasize that this is a story of inspiration.
Definitely. And obviously, you've experienced the cancer journey from three different perspectives as a patient, a relative, and a nurse. I was wondering, how do these differ and which one did you find the most challenging, John?
Yeah, they all brought different challenges, to be honest, Michelle. As I say, as an immature and naive 18-year-old, I'd left school with a handful of worthless qualifications, having completely squandered my education, much preferring to play the practical joker. Still do today, but there you go. I struggled with both the physical and the emotional effects of cancer and its indiscriminate treatments. Back in the 70s, there was very little that could be done against the brutal side effects of both chemotherapy and radiotherapy. However, and very importantly, I don't want to lessen the seriousness of a cancer diagnosis and its treatment today. That's clearly a very serious diagnosis. All of that said, I strongly believe, as I keep saying, the psychological effects of the disease are just as important today as they were back in the 70s, almost 50 years ago, and as such deserve to be a high priority when it comes to mapping out patients' pathways of care. Regarding my daughter, there's no worse feeling in the world than being told that your child has a cancer diagnosis. Yet, ironically, knowing that I failed to cope both physically and mentally with my diagnosis and the chemical torture that I underwent, I would have happily taken the chemotherapy on behalf of Donna if I could have done that. Watching her as a young 4-year-old go into hospital relatively well, and then over a period of weeks, which turned into months, deteriorate in front of our eyes was the most helpless feeling ever. And as a parent, emotions of failure, despair, heartbreak, a whole myriad of emotional kaleidoscope were constant companions. In complete contrast to that, of course, working as a nurse in the demanding field of cancer services brought me so much reward, knowing that I was making a difference to patients and their families, many of whom had the same cancers experienced by both myself and Donna. I was fortunate enough to enjoy a meteoric rise to the top of the nursing ladder, concluding with my appointment as head of service for haematology at my hometown hospital, South Tyneside, the same hospital, ironically, that made my cancer diagnosis almost 50 years ago, and where I prescribed chemotherapy, undertook invasive and diagnostic operations, and also broke bad news to individuals and their loved ones. And that's a strange kind of situation, Michelle, because that in itself brought about a strange sense of guilt, survivor guilt, and I talk about this quite extensively in the book. Here I was, breaking bad news to people in the same way that bad news had been broken to my parents all those decades ago. And yet I had this bizarre sense of guilt. Here I am, still alive after my parents were told that I wouldn't survive. And I'm telling people that they're not expected to survive now. So survivor guilt is perhaps one of the hardest emotions I've had to cope with. It is, however, important for me to say that I'm very, very humbled to currently be one of the longest cancer survivors in the UK. And in my humble opinion, the individuals who were entrusted into my care weren't just patients, some of whom who would attend for many years, others for shorter periods of time, but people nonetheless who would put all of their trust in my care, people who would confide in my ability to be able to resolve or perhaps lessen the problem they had. And these people, as I say, they weren't just patients, they became therapeutic friends, and I think that's a very important point.
Yeah, I think it's obviously you've had a lot of wisdom and knowledge from that experience. And I was wondering if there's any valuable lessons from it that you'd like to share with us. I mean, not only for those people who are going through cancer, but just for people in general in life.
Absolutely. The first thing I would say, with total respect, is life is not a rehearsal. Undoubtedly, it can be difficult to navigate, but life is for living. It's a once only opportunity to enjoy, no one person can deny anyone else the opportunity to enjoy life to the best of their ability, and that's very important that we do that. In my view, nothing is as important as family. They are a link to the past and also a connection to the future. And of course, our future is so uncertain. No one knows what lies ahead, what fate has planned for us. Therefore, live life fully, enjoy it as if each day were your last, because one day it will be, and you should have no regret to leave behind. And again, I'm going to say something that people might find a little bit bizarre, but for me, I'm actually grateful for the cancer diagnosis because, quite simply, it's made me who I am today. And without that diagnosis, I don't know where I would have been. But yeah, it's a strange emotion for me to feel grateful to such a devastating disease, but it has made me who I am today. What I would also say is never look back on your life unless you're prepared to smile and be reflective. Never look forward unless you can dream. Everyone needs dreams. We all need dreams and hope. In the same way that I had dreams during my diagnosis, but we also know that life can be cruel, often very difficult to negotiate, as I and many others had discovered, but it's there to be enjoyed and it's our responsibility to do so. And again, just touching back on the issue of taking my own life, on several occasions, I almost grasped that irreversible handshake that suicide offered me, but without the courage to complete that task. And I don't know when it happened, but I suddenly realized that life is so short. It's a precious commodity, unknown in its content and dimensions, and significantly its length. And finally, on that, concluding this question, over the years I've written dozens and dozens of articles for national and international nursing and medical press. And I don't want to sound holier than thou or blasé at all, but this is an important point. I've presented lectures the length and breadth of the country on many aspects of haematology and cancer management. I've been honoured to have won numerous awards both locally and nationally for my work in both oncology and haematology. Yet my greatest achievement is survivorship. And also, if I die tomorrow, I can comfortably say I've had a great life, but I'd still like it to continue a lot longer.
Oh, definitely. And thank you for those wise words, John. And speaking of words, I was wondering, obviously Hawkwind played an important part in your book, in your story, and in your life in general. And I was wondering, do you have a favorite lyric by them that you'd be willing to recite for our viewers?
Yeah, great question, Michelle. I've never been asked that one before, but yes, Hawkwind did play a very important role following my diagnosis, especially during treatment and indeed into my recovery. And they're still important in my life today. I followed them the length and the breadth of the country, eventually becoming friends with the band. In fact, I actually joined the band, much to my wife's disgust, as part of the road crew back in 2006 and 2007 national tours. But regarding your question, I don't have a specific song that is favoured more than any other. I guess it really does depend on my mood and whether or not I want to listen to some ambient Hawkwind or some rockier Hawkwind numbers. Mm-hmm. However, for the benefit of this question, one song in particular has significant importance, and it's called 10 Seconds of Forever. It was written by a gentleman who sadly is no longer with us, the genius that was Robert Calvert, who suffered from bipolar disorder. The song is a spoken piece with background special effects and music, guitar, drums, and saxophone. It was recorded for the Space Ritual album, which was recorded in Liverpool and Brixton in 1973. However, when I was on tour with Hawkwind in 2007, I rewrote the lyrics to that number, but my lyrics reflected the first 10 seconds of a cancer diagnosis. And when Hawkwind headlined a festival at Donington Park in the same year, they asked me to perform my lyrics on stage with them. So this is my version of 10 Seconds of Forever to reflect the first 10 seconds of a cancer diagnosis. Sadly, I've got no Hawkwind music for you, so you just have to put up with my voice. So here goes. In the 10th second of forever, I was informed that my world would end, and with it, my very existence. In the 9th second of forever, I felt a numbness overcome my body, the tingling sensation of fear and the chronic pain of this reality. In the 8th second of forever, I thought of a leaf, a stone, and the creaking branches of the ancient oak tree, and the innocence of life. In the 7th second of forever, I remembered a room where voices spoke to me about nothing. In the 6th second of forever, I thought of the life I would not lead and the effects of my confused mind. And in the 5th second of forever, I thought of the toxic poison that would attack my fragile veins. In the 4th second of forever, I could remember nothing I did not love. And in the 3rd second of forever, I thought of my father, my mother, and my sister crying. In the penultimate second of my diagnosis, I saw the rain caressing the window, the marshmallow clouds drift through the sky. In the first and final second of what seemed forever, I thought of the others, those who had not been so fortunate, and the long past that had led to now, and never, never, forever. So that's 10 seconds of forever. But more significantly than that, I found untold inspiration throughout my cancer journey, Michelle, in the history and spirituality of the Lakota Sioux Nation after I read a book called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown. And the inspiration that I gleaned from those pages would prove motivational above and beyond Hawkwind. And I could not for 1 second have imagined that the impact that book would have, and particularly the struggles of the Great Sioux Empire, how it would have such a bearing on my life and what lay ahead. As I read more and more about the Sioux Indians, a new goal entered my mind, and I promised myself that if I was fortunate enough to survive, then one day I would visit Wounded Knee. And my wife and I have walked that sacred and hallowed ground on many, many occasions. But a few years back, I contacted the Sioux Tribal Council on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and I asked if I could visit. And after eventually getting numerous emails back, they agreed. And in 2018, I spent a week on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation with the indigenous people of South Dakota, the same people who unknowingly supported me through life's greatest challenge, my cancer journey. And in the next few years, I plan to revisit Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and shake hands once again with the indigenous people that inspired me to overcome society's greatest and perhaps most feared disease. I'll embrace those relatives, the relatives of those that supported me throughout most, if not all, of my treatment, and yet they had no idea who I was.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that experience with us, and also for your recital, which is very powerful and moving. And it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about your book, Me and My Shadow, John. You don't only write memoirs, you've obviously got other books that you read and write, and you've got some, I believe, for your grandson. Would you like to tell us about those?
Yeah. I've got a number of health-related problems. I'll not go into those and bore you with those. You could read the book and you'll find out. Not least to say that in 2000, at the end of 2018, I was diagnosed with bladder cancer, almost certainly attributable to some of the treatment that I received. And my grandson came along at the same time, Daniel, and he just proved a massive inspiration. So when I retired last year, I had to consider what I was going to do. And my wife had suggested that because I've always been an elasticated grandpa, telling these weird and wonderful stories to my grandchildren over the years, she suggested that I should write some children's storybooks. So these all feature myself, and I'm Daniel's papa. Daniel is currently 5 years of age, but in the book he's 11 and 12, just because we're getting into all kinds of trouble, and obviously he converses with me. So these books are really all for Daniel. So all about my elasticated stories like the time I captured the Loch Ness Monster before letting him go again, or the time I won the world's greatest steeplechase, the Grand National, on a donkey called Slow Coach, or the time I swam across the Atlantic Ocean in just a few hours, or the time I built a sherbet-fueled rocket and blasted up to Jupiter, or even the time I ran faster than the Japanese bullet train, the time I taught Tarzan how to survive in the jungle. What else? Yeah, the time I climbed up Mount Everest barefoot and made friends with the abominable snowman. So all of my vivid imagination ran riot, and I was able to write my first book, Strange Trips and Weird Adventures. That was published last year. Then my second title, Blenkinsop Blabbermouth and the Ghost of Broderick McCaffrey, that was released on the 16th of December last year, and both of these are available from the Book Dragon. Mm-hmm. While my third book, The Fastest Water Pistol in Splodge City, is due for publication in June this year. I also have The Kingdom of Huckleberry Jam, that's completed but has yet no publication date. And I'm currently working on Luna von Beulah, the mystical mouse from Missoula.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing some more about your work, John, and thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, a pleasure's been all mine, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.